300 million kilograms every single year. That is how much tea this island produces. Sri Lanka is one of the largest tea exporters on earth, and the name Ceylon, the old colonial name for this country, is still stamped on tea tins in kitchens from London to Los Angeles. But how did this island become the tea capital of the world? The answer begins not with tea at all. It begins with total devastating ruin. I'm Christina, and this is the story of how Sri Lanka, its land, its people, its extraordinary capacity to adapt, transformed one of the greatest agricultural disasters in history into a legacy that defines the island to this day. These are the highlands of Sri Lanka. Nuwara Eliya, Dimbula, but these hills were not always like this. What are you looking at is not the normal order of things. It is the result of one of the most dramatic agricultural transformations in history. Sri Lanka was not always a tea island. Before any of this, before the tea estates, before the pickers, before any of it, this island ran on coffee, completely and totally on coffee. Ceylon coffee was commanding top prices in London. The island had become, by the 1870s, one of the world's leading producers. And here's the thing that I keep thinking about. This was not a fragile operation propped up by luck. This was a serious, deeply embedded, massively invested industry. Every planter, every banker, every merchant on the island had their future tied up to that crop. And that is exactly why what happened next was so catastrophic. When you build everything around one thing, and only one thing, you have no defense when that one thing disappears. Ceylon had put everything into coffee. It had not diversified, it had not hedged, it had simply gone all in. And in 1869, something arrived that would destroy it completely. Orange-colored spots appeared on coffee leaves at an estate in Madulsima, deep in hill country. The culprit was a fungus, coffee leaf rust. The planters gave it a grimly iconic nickname, Devastating Emily. Within months, it was spreading from estate to estate across the highlands, carried by wind and rain, unstoppable. Every treatment failed. Every attempt to contain it failed. The disease simply kept moving. By 1886, coffee exports had fallen by 80%. The financial collapse that followed was immediate and brutal. In 1884, the Oriental Bank Corporation, one of the main financiers of coffee estates, failed. Prominent merchant families who had been operating for generations ceased trading. Estates that had been worth thousands of pounds sold for a fraction of that, if sold at all. Those same hills you see in the footage, empty, abandoned, the bushes dying, the money gone, an entire way of life finished within a single generation, just gone. It destroyed families, it destroyed institutions, it destroyed the entire economic foundation the island had been built on. Devastating Emily earned her name. But, and this is the part that keeps pulling me back to this story, the island did not stay down. Something happened in those ruins that nobody quite planned for, and it started quietly, with an experiment. As far back as 1867, a small experimental plot of tea had been planted in the Kandy district on the Lulikundera estate. Just 19 acres, trying something new. Tea was almost unknown in Ceylon. It was nothing more than a quiet experiment. But as the blight intensified through the 1870s, desperate planters began looking at that experiment differently. What had seemed eccentric started to look like a lifeline. And so, one by one, estates began converting. But it was not easy. It was not a simple swap. Tea bushes take 3 to 5 years to mature before you can harvest them commercially, which means 3 to 5 years of no income. Factories had to be completely rebuilt or adapted, and the workers had to learn an entirely new skill, because picking tea is extraordinarily precise. You take only the 2 nearest leaves and a single bud from each stem, nothing else. The quality of every cup depends on that discipline being maintained. But the land responded. Tea acreage expanded from those first 19 experimental acres to 4,700 acres by 1878. By 1883, it had reached 32,000 acres. Exports to Britain grew from 282 pounds to over 4.3 million pounds by 1885 and 23 million pounds by 1888. The momentum became unstoppable. Tea had overtaken coffee in total acreage across the island. In less than 30 years, Ceylon had completely rebuilt its economy. I want to stop for a moment before we go to the end of the story, because when I look at that footage, the pickers moving through the rows, the factories processing leaves, there is something I cannot stop thinking about. All of this was built by people whose name were never put on the tin, and that part of the story matters just as much as any of the rest of it. The expansion of tea across Ceylon's highlands required a workforce far larger than the island's existing population could supply. The British colonial administration's answer was to bring in workers from South India, primarily from Tamil-speaking regions also under British control. Between the 1830s and 1930s, hundreds of thousands of Tamil workers made the journey to Ceylon, many under conditions that were exploitative by design. They became known as the Malaiyaha Tamils, or upcountry Tamils. They lived in what were called line rooms on the estates, basic barracks where entire families shared a single room. They worked long days in all weather, moving through the bushes with practiced hands, taking only the finest leaves. Minimal wages, no political rights, no real path out of the estate system. The colonial hierarchy of the plantations placed productivity and profit far above any consideration of the people doing the work. Their descendants are still on those estates today, still part of this industry. And while the conditions are not what they were, the community of uptown Tamils in Sri Lanka continues to navigate the long shadow of that history. Social and economic challenges that trace directly back to how the plantation system was built. The tea industry that the world enjoys today was made possible by their labor. That cannot be separated from the story. The more I sit with this story, the less it feels like the story just about tea industry. It feels like something bigger than that. This island lost everything, an entire economy built over generations, wiped out by a fungus. And what happened next was not rebuilding the same thing. It was choosing something completely different, trying something nobody on the island had really done before, not knowing if it would work. That combination, resilience and experimentation together, is what I find extraordinary about this story. Because resilience on its own sometimes just means enduring. But resilience and a willingness to try something new, that is what changes things. That is what turned ruin into one of the most recognizable products in the world. So, next time you make a cup of tea, I hope you think about that. I'm Christina for RTV Global Network. Ayaboan.